Hello everyone and welcome to the Melbourne Traditionalists podcast, episode 77. I'm Mark Moncrief and I have with me today Mr. Mark Richardson from Oz Conservative. How are you?
I'm very well, thank you, Mark. Good to be with you again for another episode.
Always good to have you on. I wish I could have you on more often, but you're quite a busy man.
I am, so yeah, you managed to drag me in
Yeah,
when you can.
And I keep saying to you, quit your job, abandon your family, and you're like, no.
Yeah, maybe not
Yeah.
this year, but...
Yeah. Well, I guess hope for me next year. Hopefully next year you'll do that and I can have you on the podcast more often.
Throw everything to the winds and I'll be in here every day.
Good stuff. I'll see what I can do. Because that's the kind of guy I am. Now, we have been talking off air about Black Lives Matter.
Yeah.
And about, where they fit in and where they come from. And I guess we're going to take a bit of a step back. We're not going to talk about necessarily, where the membership comes from and where the leadership comes from, but where the ideas come from.
Yeah, that's exactly right. So I want to go on a little bit of a rant, I'm afraid, a philosophical rant. And it really stems from a bit of frustration that when the Black Lives Matter was really big in the news and on social media, there was a whole lot of good investigative journalism is probably the wrong word, but when claims were made by Black Lives Matter, a lot of people actually gave good answers.
Mm-hmm.
So, for instance, the idea that white policemen in America were kind of just opening up indiscriminately and shooting dead black people.
Yeah.
There was a whole lot of data to show that actually wasn't the case, that black officers were more likely to shoot dead a black suspect than white officers and so on. And it made no difference at all. And I got into some lengthy arguments with people trying to use facts like that to just even dent the confidence that they had in all of this.
Now I'm just going to interrupt you.
Yeah.
I was reading yesterday an article about a police officer who said that he graduated in a class of 14 officers. 2 of those officers were involved in shootings, both within their first year of graduating, and that the remaining members never fired a shot in the rest of their careers.
Wow. Okay.
And he's retired now.
Yep.
And he was saying that new police officers are much more likely to shoot than experienced officers.
Which would tend to go along with the cases I've seen, actually. They do seem to be younger officers. But I guess my frustration was just the complete wall that goes up when you try and discuss things in terms of the facts and the data. And I want to mention 2 reasons, I think, for why that's the case. And
why the arguments aren't listened to.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And why it's just so baked in, these kind of beliefs. And so one of them has to do with the change to what you might call a rights-based culture. So in traditional Western thought, justice was defined as giving people their due, and this goes back to the ancient Greeks, and giving people their due really meant, and I've mentioned this to you before, honouring people and who made you what you are, who created you, and that could be the god or the gods, it could be your family, it could be your nation or people. So you had, then it was considered just that you had certain obligations toward those entities.
Yep.
And so things like filial piety, so piety toward your parents was important, religious observances, some sort of patriotic duty and so on. These were all considered to be just, and therefore, in that kind of traditional culture, you as an individual, if there was a negative side to all this, it was that you might feel guilt if you thought that you hadn't fulfilled these obligations.
Yes.
And your parents might use guilt to try and sway you, for instance. So that might be the negative side, if you like. But that's how it was. But from early modern times, there's been a shift to a different understanding of justice, one based on a concept of abstract rights and individual rights, really, where it's a case of I have a right to this, why don't I have it? And that leads to what they call a grievance-based politics, where the focus is on your grievances, that your rights haven't been met. And I think what the real step from there, which you really notice today, and which is part of the real problem, is that people then start to identify with their particular grievances.
Yes.
And I notice this with my female colleagues at work, that they take their position as supposedly oppressed women, and it becomes baked in as part of their identity.
Mm-hmm.
And once you reach that point in the culture, which I think we have reached, it then is, of course, very difficult to challenge people's mindset at all, because you're challenging not just a fact in terms of politics, you're challenging the whole edifice of their identity, which people are therefore very reluctant to shift on or to budge at all.
I think you're very right there. And I think that also it goes away from even what we were told when we were growing up about, things should be rational and things should actually be logical, things should make sense. There should be an argument and you should be able to make an argument for yourself. And now it's simply, this is my right.
Yeah.
And it doesn't matter. There is no logic. There is no rational process. It's just, this is my right and it can't be taken from me.
Well, that's I agree with you, and you've kind of added in a third reason now for me, which I think you noticed that too, that the idea that there's some objective reality that we're all appealing to and trying to...
Sorry, that's the term I was trying to think of, objective reality, thank you.
That you notice that now, that really it's more about, this is my program, and so what is true is what helps that program to be achieved.
Yes.
And yeah, so that's the appeal. So if the facts don't fit the program, then the facts just are either... I mean, there's still probably a little bit of embarrassment if your program, if somebody brings up a fact which contradicts your program, but it's not really... The truth is really the truth of your program as an individual rather than any objective reality. So yeah, I agree completely with that.
And of course, then what people say is that it's not their lack of argument, it's that you're a bastard.
Yeah, correct. That's exactly right.
Yeah, it's not that my argument is nonsensical, it's you're a bastard. And if you weren't a bastard, you would ignore the fact that my argument is nonsensical.
Which puts a heck of a lot of pressure on people.
Well, absolutely.
But you're 100% right. Which is what I cop in the staff room when...
I bet you cop it.
I'm shocked. I'm shocked that you would say something that contradicts my program.
Now, for those who don't know, you're a secondary school teacher.
Yeah. Okay. So the other one I was going to raise is where I come back to my friend Shelley, the poet.
Your friend.
My friend. No, I think... leftism is not one monolithic tradition, but there is a strand of leftism which you can see has been around for some hundreds of years now, and it's this idea that so originally in Western thought, people the limitation on achieving some kind of humanist utopia on Earth was the belief that human nature was corrupted.
Mm-hmm.
So it's not that it was all bad, but it was at the very least corrupted. So you would never have some perfect utopian society, even if you got all the social settings right. Things would still go wrong. There would still be evil in the world, and people would still act badly, because that's the nature of the beast, if you like. And that got challenged from at least the 18th century onwards. And the idea was that actually human nature was good. This is where the whole noble savage thing comes from.
That's right. It's our institutions that make us bad.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. So it's exactly right. So it was the power structures is the modern term for it. That it was only power structures which corrupted us and which put limits on our equality and our freedom and our harmony and the rest of it. And initially the emphasis was on class-based power structures. It was the problem with the aristocracy and the kings and the priests and so on. And if you got rid of them, then human nature could be regenerated, and all of a sudden we would be living in a utopia where we could do what we like and just rub along perfectly well with each other in a complete state of individual equality. But from the very beginning, and this is why I bring my friend Shelley in the early 1800s in, there was also the whole idea of class, of sex and race as well. I mean, even in Shelley's time, he was ahead of his time a bit, but
we're talking about Percy Shelley?
Percy Bysshe Shelley, the poet, yep. The English poet. He talked about sex distinctions. He used the phrase, these detestable distinctions.
Yes.
Because he thought they too were a potential source of, distinctions between people that would then set up these unequal power structures and the like.
That's right. So we're talking at least 2 centuries that this kind of nonsensical thinking has been around.
Yeah, correct. And of course, with the demise of Marxism really pushed the class-based ideas more than anything else. But with the demise of orthodox Marxism, you had, from the 60s onwards, maybe 70s, a really big focus now on sex and race as the power structures in society. So you had patriarchy and you had whiteness. And the idea is that,
and of course these Marxist ideas made their way into liberalism and have completely transformed liberalism.
Yeah, so that's exactly right. So particularly amongst what we would call left liberals, these are becoming more and more dominant ways of thinking about things. Absolutely. The point I'm making in terms of Black Lives Matter is that you're running up against the hurdle here that people have invested an almost religious-like belief that if we can deconstruct whiteness, that we reach the end point, if you like, the culminating point of humanity and in some kind of humanist utopia on Earth, where everything is regenerated and we cast off all the oppression and so on. And so when you challenge something like Black Lives Matter on factual grounds, you are going to struggle with people because people are invested in this idea of, but this is this great movement of liberation which is going to liberate humanity. So you're stepping on some very sensitive toes here where people again are very reluctant to budge, because people construct meaning out of these things. They construct meaning for their lives.
Well, if you believe that the world can be perfect, somebody who opposes that, they're by definition evil.
Well, they're a supremacist, aren't they? Because they are. This is where this whole white supremacist phrase comes from. It's odd. If you look at it at a purely objective level, if a white person says, I like my heritage and I'd like it to continue, why should that be any worse than, say, an Aborigine saying the same thing?
Mm-hmm.
Well, the reason it is in the leftist view, is because whiteness itself is this power structure which is built on exploitation and oppression. So if you defend it, you're defending inequality and oppression and so on. So you automatically become a white supremacist in their view.
That's right, and there we go back to that Marxist class struggle.
Yeah.
Because class struggle says that there are only two classes. There's the oppressed class and there's the oppressor class.
Yeah.
And there are no neutral people.
Yeah.
If you're not being oppressed, then you are an oppressor.
Yeah.
And they've taken that, which was by economics, so those people who were rich oppressed those who were not. That's what Marxism says. And then they've taken it into culture and said those who have power, or those who we can accuse of having power, are the exploiters, and everyone else is the exploited.
Yeah, and to back you up on this, I noticed very recently, one of the key faults in this whole ideology is that when you look at America, or England for that matter, and increasingly Australia, if you look at indicators of who really is privileged in terms of education and income and so on, it's not whites anyway, it's generally Asians who top the list. So, for instance, Indian Americans, their average household income is something like 40% higher than the white average income. Yeah. It's very considerably higher. So you make this point and it gets you nowhere. But I did notice the other day that increasingly Asians are being bracketed as white, which makes no sense in terms of race, of course. But in terms of this ideology,
That's
it
right.
does make sense.
It does, yes.
So they are white in virtue of being part of this power structure, if you like.
That's right. And of course, Jews are also being put into the same category.
Yeah.
Some people say they are, some people say they aren't.
Yeah.
We won't get into that here, but they're also finding that, hey, you can't play the little dance. You can't say, oh, I am this minute and I'm not that minute, which is what a lot of Asian people are doing as well. And they're finding that, no, that's not working.
Yeah. Look, I expect increasingly Asians will be considered white, which it sounds bizarre, I know. But for the theory to work, that has to happen.
Well, John Derbyshire, he says that he puts forward the idea of the ice people versus the sun people.
Okay.
And white people and North Asians are ice people. You know, they're practically white. They came from an environment where, the winter's long and you have to plan. And then the sun people come from an environment where, hey, it's pretty good all year round with the occasional disaster, so you don't really have to plan. So you have these two groups, one who are long-term planners and one who are not long-term planners, and effectively they're now in competition with each other.
Yeah.
So what you're saying actually fits in with his theory.
Yeah, and the reason it fits is because if you take that longer term view, if you invest heavily into your children's education, like Asian families stereotypically do, you are going to end up with a higher average income and educational attainment and so on.
Yeah.
Which then puts you, in theory at least, in the oppressor group, which has been labelled a whiteness structure, so therefore you become part of the whiteness thing. Look, it hasn't completely happened yet, of course. There's lots of Asians still claim to be part of the oppressed group.
Yeah.
But I have noticed lately, increasingly, that's happening.
Actually, sorry, on that same point, I read an article recently about an exclusive school in New York City, and the Asians were basically attacking the blacks verbally, saying, you're accusing us of all the things that you used to accuse white people of, but we're not putting up with that. And apparently, it came very close to violence.
Okay. Interesting. So anyway, for those, well, we've got three reasons now. For all of those reasons we've talked about, we're going to have things like the Black Lives Matters movement for as long as these cultural and political trends keep going on. It's going to be very hard to shift them, really. I mean, you could give all the money in the world, and you're still going to have these kind of ideas,
percolating
in society. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. But the other thing I think is that there's a lot of elite support for Black Lives Matter, and not just as an ideology, but I mean actually financing them into existence. There are lots and lots of groups who form and go nowhere. And one of the reasons is because they don't get this financing, and they don't get that level of background support that the Black Lives Matter movement has. And of course, we can see exactly the same thing with Extinction Rebellion. So a group that came out of nowhere, and now everyone's heard of it.
Well, that's exactly right. And so then you have to ask the question why, and a lot of it's corporate funding. It's not just state funding, it's corporate funding. So you have to ask yourself, why are the big corporations funding groups like this? And I don't know, I mean, instinctively you have to think that the corporations really want to batter down on any kind of mainstream majoritarian loyalties which kind of compete with market loyalties. I don't know. That's
well, I think that the education system, which has been so long on the left and is getting more left all the time, and we all think that that's not possible, but it seems that we're wrong.
Yeah.
I think that's had its effect, and that these people are coming out of the education system, 16, 20 years of education, and they're thoroughly indoctrinated. That's how they think the world is. And I also noticed that there's a lot more financial illiteracy in the world than there used to be, even a few decades ago. You look at the governments don't have any problem with mass debt. A little debt can be good, but the levels that we're talking about are just insane, and they just keep piling it on. And I think a lot of companies are thinking, well, hey, we can be just as irresponsible, but also it's not their money. When you're the CEO of a company, it's not coming out of your pay packet; it's coming out of the shareholders or the company's resources. And when you're lower down in the company and you can get the company to spend money that again isn't yours, well, where's the disadvantage?
Yeah, no, they're all good points. So, but if I come back to the first point you made, which makes a lot of sense. So the leftists have captured the institutions, and so including the educational institutions. So they're now coming into these big corporations and becoming the advertising people and part of the managerial class and so on. And they're starting to change the politics of these corporations. Does that not then mean that the right liberals have been somewhat foolish in terms of allowing the left to capture the institutions as much of that as they have? Because
I absolutely think they have, but at the same time, the two have the left and right decided, left and right liberals decided that instead of being enemies, they should actually cooperate. And over the last 30 years, you've seen that the right liberals used to be a lot more involved in culture, and now they're completely out of it. They hardly ever criticise what the left does.
Yeah,
it's as if it happens to somebody else in another place, and they just don't even talk about it. So, for example, we've had Scott Morrison, a Liberal government in Canberra, and at the same time he's been the Prime Minister, we've had the Drag Time Story Hour.
Yeah.
Right, with drag queens reading stories to children in public libraries. And what's been the response of this man who says he goes to church every week? it's been very, very muted.
Yep.
You know, he said some things, but he's always made sure it's not too controversial, and he's never come out and said, no, this is wrong.
Yeah. No, I agree with you. I guess, coming back to what we were talking about earlier, if you're a big corporation too, given that the modern left now doesn't focus as much on class, it's a lot more race and sex based.
Yeah.
That could be a good thing from your point of view, I suppose. If you want to focus politics on, racial things or sex things, it's a hell of a lot more convenient than having to explain, than having a militant trade unionism based on improving working conditions or something like that.
Absolutely.
That kind of leftism you probably don't want.
Absolutely. And that's a great example. That's what the right liberals have gained. They've gained industrial harmony.
Yeah.
And now, instead of people being against management, the workers are against each other.
Yeah.
It's men against women.
Yeah.
It's different ethnic groups against each other. And the management is actually important because they're the only ones who can come in and say, hey, calm down. These are the rules. You need us. You need us, or else it'll be chaos.
Yeah.
But of course, at the same time, the left has stopped a lot of their attacks on the rich.
Yeah.
And again, 30 years ago, it wasn't uncommon to hear people talking about, the rich don't pay their fair share and blah, blah, blah. You still hear a little bit of that, but it's much, much more muted.
I'll give you a little example of that sticks in my mind for some reason. So there's a politician, I think he's from Queensland, a Liberal Party, I think, and he posted a picture of himself. He just installed this new Hills hoist in his backyard, and he kind of said, look, I've done this for the missus kind of thing, and there's a picture of him looking happy and his missus looking happy and the kids playing around. And the unions got stuck into him. And they got stuck into him on the grounds of sexism. How dare you insinuate that maybe your wife will be using this Hills hoist, et cetera, et cetera. But the change, if that's what the unions are focusing on...
Oh, absolutely.
They'll savagely attack someone because his wife is using a Hills hoist.
Yeah.
That's nice if you're a big company, I imagine, if that's where they're putting their energies into.
And there's one of the mistakes that us on the right make, is we see something like that and it enrages us. It's ridiculous. It's absurd. Yeah. And we come to the defence of these people.
Yeah.
And really, we should just let them hang.
Yeah. No.
Because let's face it, that's what they're doing to us.
Yeah. Yeah, that's right. So, I think the point you made earlier is a really good one, actually, that because when you do raise, and I think this is a real stumbling block for us too, that even making those factual counterpoints has become difficult.
Yes.
Because the immediate response is, you must be some kind of bastard just for raising objective truth.
Yes, yeah. And it's not about ideas, everything becomes personal.
Yeah.
And I've found that there's either two ways to deal with that. The first is, when you're arguing with somebody, you'll hardly ever convince them.
Yeah.
But you can convince people who are listening. And if no one else is there to listen, then walk away, be quiet, whatever. The other is you can be personal back and, actually pick on something that they have, you're talking about me being a bastard. Well, what about your tone of voice? What about that time 2 weeks ago when you didn't hold the door? It's totally inconsequential, but it's bringing it back to them.
Yeah.
And making them go, oh, maybe I am.
Yeah.
Because even though they are captured by this ideology, they're still people and they still feel those emotions that people are supposed to feel.
Yeah. Look, I certainly want to underline the first tactic you used there, because I think that's really important not to get too demoralised by it, because you can plant the seeds of ideas still. And so people in the audience who are wavering or a bit more open-minded, I think that's really important to keep still putting the facts out there, even though, you know, we've gone through and talked about why some people are so intransigent in terms of holding on to these claims. Even if you can show quite directly that they're false claims, they will just so strongly grasp onto them. But yeah, there'll still be people listening in, hopefully.
Yeah, absolutely. And that reminds me that, you know, we've gone through a phase for a decade or so where, you know, one of the things about everyone on the right is that everyone has felt like they are the last sane person on earth.
Yep.
And one thing that the internet has done is that it has allowed us to get in contact with people who feel the same way as we do.
Yes.
But one of the things that we in the Melbourne Traditionalists have been very keen on is getting people to meet up in real life and just, you know, have those real life connections. And even on YouTube, I've noticed my numbers are quite low, and that's because of I've been shadow banned by YouTube, and that's the future. That's how it's going to be, and we just have to adapt to that. So if you can also listen to this on Podbean.
Yeah.
So you can go. I know you've gone and listened to it on there.
I have. It's a easy one to use. So yeah, I recommend Podbean. That's a good one. And
at the moment, I've only got 5 people subscribed. One of them is me. One of them is Mark Richardson. So it'd be great to have some more people there. You know, but in real life, if you know people, if you know 2 or 3 people who agree with you, not on everything, but, you know, 75%, then actually start meeting up in real life. You know, myself and Mark Richardson, we started the Melbourne Traditionalists, and there were exactly 2 of us.
Yeah.
And it was about 6 months before we got a third person, and now we just had a barbecue and we had 10 people, and a lot of people were away because it's Christmas, New Year.
Yeah, and you take things just that one step further, I think, once you start meeting up in real life. You know, people are starting to form friendships with each other and connections.
Absolutely.
And so, yeah, once you're up and running on the ground, it's you've gone to the next level, which helps.
Yeah.
Because I think you still feel a little bit. I mean, so independent social media has been good while it lasts.
We're not sure how long,
but it's still there. And as Mark said, yeah, it's been great in the sense that you don't feel like you're the last person with these ideas left on planet Earth.
Yes.
So that's good, but it does take it to another level when you actually meet up with a whole group of like-minded people. And we've had 30 people roughly to conferences and things. Yep.
Yeah, close to 30. Yeah.
So it's very, very strongly encourage people to try and do that to meet up in real life.
Yeah, and I thought I'd mention this because I want to mention Podbean, but also because the episode, I think, can be a little bit black-pilled.
Yeah.
And, you know, it can be a bit like, oh, no, the left's constantly making advances and so forth. But there's actually stuff you can do. And, you know, you don't need $1 million to do it. You don't need 100 people. You can just do it with you know, 2 other people and start the ball rolling.
Yeah, definitely. So it's just going step by step, really. And if you feel that you're making progress, I think that helps a lot in terms of not being too black-pilled.
Yes.
If things are happening on the ground, and even if you're making little steps forward, it helps.
Absolutely. Thank you very much. This has been a really great conversation.
Yeah, it was very interesting. I learned some stuff, I think, from the conversation, so thank you.
Oh, good. I will end it here. And, you can listen in to the Melbourne Traditionalists podcast next week. Thank you, everyone. Bye-bye.